I am unashamed. What about you?
So we just had a snow event. I was gone. I was in Texas.
I was gone. Look, my daughter sent me a picture from like 11 o'clock.
You never had it here? Put
No.
your
Look, earphones.
No, but it didn't hit here.
No, yeah, I mean, my yard was, there was snow all in my yard.
Your yard is 20 miles north.
Oh, well,
hit
okay.
here.
I get it. You're too far south, Phil.
You're too far south.
well, that was my question. Did you actually get some down here?
So the line for it in here, if you're going to get any, it's almost like it's you can just stick to it. These things drop down to about Interstate 20. It's straight east and west.
Right.
That's about as far as they come.
You're right.
We're just south of there.
Yeah, and we're on the north side. We live on the north
What do you think
side.
that is? What do you think the reason is?
It's just it's weather patterns. They fizzle out. The further they get toward that Gulf.
That's right. The cold air.
Right on the line.
We're right on the literally, Jace. You and I live right on the line. I mean,
Were you sad that you missed the snow?
I didn't want snow because I have a wonderful crop of mayhaws, of sloes, the sloe trees.
These are berries.
I planted them 10 years ago.
they're quite
Every
impressive.
year
Yeah.
I walk out there, this time of year, I'd walk out there and look at them. And I said, I now know why they call them slows, because they're slow. I mean, they're slow to bloom. It takes a decade. And finally they started blooming. But this year was the first year that they're all blooms.
Yeah, I saw the blooms.
They're actually spelled SLOE.
Yeah.
Right.
For the record.
But everything about them is in fact slow.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's a late, when you harvest them, it's August. Well, all the plums are gone by August, except this one.
Right.
But these,
You know what's weird, Daz, is if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, but I think I read this once, that those trees were native in Scotland because they have slow gin. They were known for their gin back in our heritage country, but then they made their way over here somehow. I guess people brought them.
Yeah.
And then planted them, but now we make jelly with them, which it makes really good jelly. So
it's
I guess you could make gin with it.
some of the
if you wanted
best jelly you'll ever eat. And this year, I have three things that, see, y'all don't worry about things like this. You get up in the morning, you're like, yeah.
to. Is that how you wake up, James?
I get up in the morning saying, I've got to go out there and check the blooms on the mayhaw, the blooms, and the blooms on the sloes. And then the third thing is to see if we have an acorn crop. So I'm studying trees and seeing whether we're going to have acorns, sloes, and mayhaws, whether we're going to have them or not.
So
well, you reach a certain age where you
Last year, almost none of them produced.
reach
year.
a certain age where you get into that category of men who stare at trees.
That's it. Yep.
I don't know why that's funny.
That plus before you plunge into 1 Corinthians 15 and 16, 15, I guess, right? Yeah,
correct.
15, the resurrection. Just a reminder when we get there.
Well, we can get there.
I think you're there.
I think you're there.
We're there. But keep this in mind. When Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, you can turn it around and say, if you don't find out what the truth is, you won't be set free. So the next question would be, what do you mean? It's almost like you're saying he's going to release you from prison. Yeah, because they're sitting there arguing with him saying, we're not slaves to anybody. He said, you hold to my teaching, then you'll know the truth. It'll set you free. They said, we're not slaves to anybody. What are you talking about? Free? Free from what?
That's a good question. So what if somebody said, what are you free from? What would you say?
Yeah, it's a person. It's a being, the one you're freed from. But they don't realize that. But here's what I want you to remember, because you remember when he gets over in it, he said, well, if it's preached that there's a resurrection, why is it that some of you say there is no resurrection? Someone told him that. Someone convinced them there's no resurrection.
I think that was the Sadducees, right?
Yeah, and all this preaching that centered around it, and they didn't believe it. Well, why is my language not clear to you? This is John 8:43. Because you're unable to hear what I say. You say, can a human being be in such a grip from something that they can't hear the truth of the matter? They can't hear it. It's not. They're not taking it.
Right.
You belong to your Father. Now we're start talking about a family relationship, like we have our Father, the Son, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and we bow down to Him. You see the results of that: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all these good qualities. Well, what about the ones who someone else is their father? The relationship. Mm-hmm. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning. When you see the murder rate out the roof in any culture, you say, Satan is behind that. He was a murderer from the beginning. Now, this has been going on ever since God created us. Not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. All these things, you say, the murder rate's up, and what else is there? When he lies, he speaks his native language. Well, you just think about that. You're like, when he opens his mouth, it is a lie from top to bottom on every issue that's good. So when he lies, he speaks his native language. He is a liar. Now, check this. And the father of lies. So you take a person like Vladimir Putin. He doesn't know that. He is under complete control from Satan himself. He's famous for two things, and they all are. Go back to Stalin or Lenin or, Hitler, or you could all of them back there, Nebuchadnezzar, go all the way back. You say, what is going on there? They're under the complete control of the evil one.
Lying and killing.
So you two things. They lie right now. The big thing is we can't get out. It's so much false information coming out of Russia. It's blocking this and blocking that.
Propaganda.
Propaganda trying to get rid of, trying to stop the lies where you can't stop them from lying.
Right.
I was thinking about that.
Murder, you say they slaughter their fellow man, and they lie until it is pathetic. Everybody in our government, evidently, they run around and say, well, we need to do this. It's just satanic.
Right.
Well, Phil, when I went to I was in Detroit this weekend, and it was a good event. It was for a Christian school outside of Detroit and Rochester. But
so a little light dusting of snow.
Well, there was snow everywhere. I was like, look at all the snow. Missy went with me. She was promoting her book, Because We're Family, I think is the name of it. So it's going really well. But I'll tell you, I feel better about Detroit. I mean, because here we had a pocket of people sold out. And, I shared Jesus. But I was amazed that along the journey, because it was a hard place to get to, that people kept asking me, evidently, did I talk about the Ukraine on one of our earlier podcasts?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
I brought it up. Well, they were asking me about that. And because they were surprised, I guess, that I was there. Of course, it was 30 years ago. But
by the way, Jace, I talked to Mike Kellett this morning, and he told me to tell you, so I just thought about it, tell you on the podcast, that the same guy who was over it when you guys were there is still working with that group, and so they've been getting some money to him to get to the brothers. So.
Oh, I know. Well, I got asked to give money to the group that I was with, so I was aware of that, and of course I did. But I just wanted to say this because I don't know the geopolitical world. I tend to be like Phil, look at it from a spiritual standpoint, but from my perspective, I do think I offer a unique perspective because if you just go back. And that was my point. A lot of people asked me about, because they were asking me questions like, well, why is this war even going on? Well, I think the amount of information that is coming out about it, the point of it all is lost somewhere with the common person.
Right.
So they were asking me, I mean, I thought Ukraine was Russia. And, they're doing these basic questions. So in 91, when the USSR was dispersed,
Right.
Ukraine was born. So it wasn't, I don't remember the exact year that I went with this group of people.
It would have been a little after that because that's when I went to
I think it was August that the wall came down and they became a country. And I think I was there in like December.
Right.
I mean, they moved quickly. I mean, the same guy. So what the plan was, just
by the way, that was the whole idea. Once the Iron Curtain went down, then Christians were like, we got to get in there because these people hadn't even had a chance to hear
exactly
the good news.
So there was a humanitarian campaign going on, like with feeding the people, because it was like a third world country. And I've shared that before. That's the first time I've ever known what it was to be hungry. The last 5 days of our trip, I got hungry because we were giving out all our food, and they need it worse than I do.
And you and one of your team members were fighting over.
Tempers started flaring. We got
buying a sausage became the
currency,
like a ribeye. I would have rolled around on the ground for a can of buying a sausage. But it's always made that verse on the Sermon on the Mount about people who hunger and thirst for righteousness. It's always made that mean more to me, because I remember, when you get hungry, that's all you think about. I mean, you're visualizing and having mirages of T-bone steaks and ribeyes and shrimp with little pineapples connected to them.
McDonald's in Moscow.
But we were over there for Jesus, and so what happened was I mainly focused on sharing Jesus. So there was an Institute of Higher Learning there in Gorlovka. That's the Russian pronunciation of it. It's spelled like Horlivka, which is about an hour north of Donetsk, which that's right on the line of some of the most serious fighting, because they've been fighting there since 2014.
Yeah.
So I've already gone through this, because in 2014, of course, this is many years after I left, there were like almost 300 civilians, 25 children, I think, killed in this uprising from this Russian-backed separatist group.
Right.
So this Institute for Foreign Languages, it was a school of higher learning. They moved an hour north in a place called Bakhmut when that happened. So I had already gone
just to
through all
escape
this.
the persecution and all that.
Well, they were literally, I remember seeing a news clip in 2014, and I was telling Missy, I paused. I was like, I walked down that road. I was walking. That's right in front of the Institute where they were showing the bombs went up. So I'd already gone through this fact. I know these people. I met hundreds of people. I shared Jesus to hundreds and hundreds, because I would teach for 3 hours a day at the university, which...
Did you ever think you'd be a university professor?
No, I actually was in Ukraine.
Well, communism is gone, so when they were under communist control, you couldn't do that, right?
Well, right, but you say it was gone, but the whole reason this uprising broke out in 2014, well, it was there. I mean, because in fact, when we met, it wasn't like once the wall fell down, oh, we're free, everybody's happy.
It's a process.
We constantly were on the move and moving to other people, because people were hearing about what we're doing. They didn't like it. And so...
Because you still had people wanting to go back under the old order.
And in 2014, it broke. I mean, it evolved to that state where they started bombing.
Let's take a break. So, Jace, I know you're always worried about losing your hair.
Oh, yeah. I get up every day and I say,
what's going to happen?
It's still here.
Will today be the day? If that ever happens to you, we've got the perfect sponsor for you, and that's our friends at Keeps, because they're there to help people early male pattern baldness. That hair starts to go. Dad, you still got most of yours. We've been blessed.
Yeah, I got the redneck lady right up the road to come in and say, give me a little trim. In about 5 minutes, I get a haircut about once a year.
Everybody needs the redneck lady.
No barber needed.
And nobody notices.
Nobody notices.
So if you're losing your hair, Keeps has you covered. They can help stop hair loss and improve hair growth. They're about half the price of a traditional pharmacy. So it's going to be a great plan. You check these guys out. There's a doctor there that's, can answer any questions you have about the health side of it. So we want you to check them out if you need them. Keeps, KEEPS.com/door. You're going to get 50% off your first order if you go to Keeps, KEEPS.com/door, and hang on to your hair.
So the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I was looking at it from a spiritual perspective now, that all these claims you see in the news so Putin, his whole deal is, they're extremists. They're so far right. I mean, they're radical. And you say, well, why is he saying all that? Because just imagine this. You have a country that used to be the USSR, who less than just a couple months after this dissolves, they open up their university to somebody like me and say, well, to Putin and that regime.
Tell us about Jesus.
That's as extreme as it can be. The fact that I was able to speak and given the green light. And look, they rolled out the red carpet for us. I mean, they're like, here's your classroom. And of course, it's a institute for learning different languages.
Yeah.
So they justified it, saying, well, you want to learn English or a form of English that we're not familiar with, let this guy talk. Because not only was I speaking English, but I was speaking a version that they truly were not familiar with.
Which is kind of
redneck plus, but you had an interpreter who was interpreting.
I didn't have an interpreter at the institute
because they were learning English.
They were learning English. No interpreter.
Which by the way, that's I hadn't thought about it, but we had the whole discussion about tongues and languages.
Exactly.
But that was what the door opened for Jase because of a language.
That's right.
Because they wanted to learn English.
Well,
but
it
he was
wasn't
using
my
the
idea.
Bible.
Yeah, it wasn't my idea. Whoever I can't remember his name.
Kenny.
Yeah, Kenny. They moved on that quickly, and so I was so glad the institute moved. Because I have a special place in my heart for them, and almost 100,000 in that city. I think it was 290,000 people when I was there in that city in Gorlovka. Well, now there's like 180 because during the fighting and the war, I mean, this is before this war broke
Yeah, the
out.
2014.
So like almost 100,000 people had left over the 2014 thing.
So just from hearing you talk, that part of the world surrounded by what, Poland,
Romania, Moldova.
yeah,
countries
and
around.
Serbia's down there.
NATO countries in there. Well, then here comes this one. But just hearing you talk, in other words, there's been, I think, from just what you said, these people have a difficult time getting along with each other.
Exactly. And it is this fear of freedom.
There's a lot of murder going on
freedom
there.
and
brutal.
Right, and democracy. And just like we talked about in Corinth, the differences in their clans has caused a lot of problem. I mean, and so it's just like anything else in life. You instead of finding the joy and the treasure in people's subtle differences, their backgrounds and their different customs, and instead of having this love for your fellow man, because speaking of lies, you got Putin saying these are our brothers, and yet you're bombing schoolhouses and hospitals and kids.
Didn't seem very brotherly.
Even in the city that I was in, Gorlovka, I mean, just 4 days ago, they shelled a school.
Yeah.
And
it's now, Jase, it's worse than when you were there.
Well, look, I couldn't even, since 2014, if I would have tried to do what we did, I'd probably be dead. I mean, don't go.
They'll kill you now.
You don't go over and start talking about God, freedom, love for your fellow man. No, it's the total opposite. So that's what I was going to say.
Which brings you back to John chapter 8.
Exactly. You talking about spiritual warfare.
Father of lies and father of murder.
Well, you know what it tells me? God had a plan. God knew all this before we did, obviously, because he entered time. He's eternal. So he entered time. We're in time. And so do you think it's a fluke or just some coincidence that the very city, the line of attack, if you look since 2014, where this has been going in, a small group of people from America went over there in 91 and 92. And look, I was just a small little leg in that. We stayed a month, almost a month. Well, then another crew come in after us. And then they stayed a month. Then another crew came in after that. I mean, and people had different skill sets and different.
And we did we did the same exact model, actually before you guys did, in Romania, which was a neighboring country.
Yep.
Once the Iron Curtain fell, same thing, had a dictator, they killed him. And so then it was wide open. And so we went in, I was a series of people that went in over the course of several months doing the exact same thing.
So it seems like to me, now,
So,
I don't want to.
Those people are y'all's converts. They're still there, aren't they?
A bunch of them.
Well, I'm assuming a lot of them went an hour north because the reason they moved an hour north is because they're shelling the streets around here, and they're trying to learn different languages. This has this has nothing to do with what's going on. But I liked it because it's a school of higher learning too. So you're getting young people who are open, because I mean, let's face it. I saw some stat the other day, which who knows if this is true, but I did think it was interesting, that when it comes to coming to Christ, I might have shared this earlier, but 85% of the people come to Christ do that before the age of 14. So the next group was 11% is 15 to 30, which there's a reason where I go people and I'm like, if you're over 40, I'm not talking to you. And now I know why after I saw that.
That's right.
Because they're not listening. So that's 4% that from 30, which is really sad.
Every time I get to a guy or a woman who's well into their 30s, going to the 40s, it's way more difficult to convert them than it is the ones who are 25, under 30.
Yeah.
And I've just watched it through the years, under 30, under 30, under 30, under 30. I said, you get over 30, it's a tough. It's
harder.
Exactly. So the whole plan was to go over there, get with the young people. They're learning English. They thought I was funny. I wasn't telling jokes up there. I mean, I was sharing Jesus, but I'm sure whatever my accent and some of the idioms I use or whatever. I mean, because they constantly laugh. And these people were hanging out.
But they laugh a lot at things that you weren't trying to be funny at.
I wasn't trying to be funny at all.
So you were telling jokes.
I'm in Russia. I was thinking I'm in Russia.
You were just funny at them looking at you.
Yeah.
Just sort of funny looking.
Well, I was.
He was sort of
I
funny
didn't
looking.
have the long beard.
No, you had the no beard.
Yeah, I looked like I halfway fit in, But what was interesting is, and I said all that to say this because I think you're right. When you look at what's going on over there, it's just evil.
Yeah.
It's evil people, and you have when you read Ephesians 6, just think about what this says, because we tend to pick on the individuals, and you made the list of them, but when he got to Ephesians 6, he said our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm.
Yeah.
That's a big crew.
It's as clear as a picture to me.
So then it says, therefore put on the full armor of God, so when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand firm. I mean, he says stand. So I'm just taking a time out here and say, do you think it's an accident or a coincidence that the circumstances set themselves up before this all happened, that a group of people moves in representing God, sharing Jesus, changing lives, getting people hooked on Jesus, therefore they have the answer to their sin.
God was giving them a way out.
Exactly. And giving them a foundation to stand on.
Yep.
From a spiritual perspective. To give them, you start going through all the passages in the Bible, Romans 5, about suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And, while we were sinners, God demonstrates his love for us. So all this that is shared with them, and then this happens, I think, well, a lot of people, they're like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Well, nobody knows this little story.
Jace,
They don't know the setup of that.
Jace, the political powers that are in control at the present time, to them, you're out of touch with reality. When you say we're looking at a spiritual problem here,
Yeah. Well,
and
the
it's
bottom
between
line
the
is,
evil one and the God of heaven, and they will say to you, the current people, these are Americans,
Yeah.
the ones, you know, that, old Patrick Henry, I love morality and religion, the big three things that'll hold us together. This is the armor, my friend, and this alone that renders us invincible. He made it. Our founding fathers and these writers back then and the guys who lived, like this guy, Patrick Henry, they saw it.
Right.
Well,
And they knew it was a spiritual fix.
Hang on, Jess. Let's take a break. All right, so we've learned from the truckers up in Canada, and even some of our own now, that it's very important to stick together. You know, we're seeing stuff happen all over the world. People have to have the same value system, have to be able to stick together. And one of our sponsors is a group called Patriot Mobile. And what they do is they stick together for what we believe in. They call themselves America's only Christian conservative cell phone provider. And that's true, because most of the big guys and the big companies, I mean, they're supporting things that we're not too crazy about. And so Patriot Mobile, they're going to offer a plan to fit any budget. They've got a 100% U.S.-based customer service team, which really makes them excellent. But really their best value is that they share our values. They support the organizations that we fight for, like religious liberty, constitutional rights, sanctity of life. Go to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them 972-PATRIOT. Get free activation with the offer code Phil. And remember, veterans and first responders are going to get a break with that. So it's patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them 972-PATRIOT.
Well, that's why, look, everybody's surprised that they're standing their ground. I'm like, I know why they're standing their ground, because there's a group of people, and look, a pretty large group, who are led by the Spirit of God over there, and God protected them way long before this ever even thought about happening. So then you have what we view as physical power or nationalistic power, which is death. People who, you just think about all the wars that have been happening since the beginning of the time. What is the ultimate weapon? They go in there and they kill all your warriors and they take all your stuff.
Yep.
And they rule. So when you read a passage like Hebrews 2:14, it says, since the children have flesh and blood, talking about the children of God, we all come from God, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the evil one, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. So you look over there and you say, what courage I'm seeing. What I'm like, I get it.
Yeah.
Because
God sent his messengers in there, and y'all were part of the group to show them the way out of that. And I guess to this day, our brothers over there, they're bound to be some. I don't know how many
no
they
doubt
are.
about it. And I think, to their credit, just whether they believe or not, there was something about them pursuing having a democracy, loving each other, and having an open society that we all embrace. I think the whole world's come together on that. Yep. But I was just saying, there was a backstory that I was fortunate and blessed to be involved in, where there were small groups of people, which God does mighty things in small groups of people, who came to Christ, and I hope are leaders in that community during this time. There's no doubt in my mind.
Well, that's why it's not a government fix. It's got to be bigger than that. So you just said small groups, Jase. Our emphasis in Romania was because we knew it was exactly what Jase described. There was still a mindset there that you couldn't, that no God, no. So it was still somewhat underground, even though now it was really, they had a freedom to do it. So we've emphasized small groups in the 3 weeks I was there. So it was such an Acts 2, 3, and 4 feel. We met every day, every night. We had an apartment. They would all pile in, and we were teaching them how to do small groups, how to lead other people in a house, in an apartment. You don't have to be in a building someplace, because we knew this thing was going to go. And then there was this group of Albanians who were there as refugees. Now, think about it. You've come into Romania, which is right out of a dictatorship, and it's third world enough, but these people had even less because whatever was going on in Albania, they wound up in Romania. Well, they were just on fire. I mean, they were brand new Christians. They were just sponges. Well, now, all these years later, because I was in 91, so it's 30 years later, these same guys that were with us in that room, because we followed up on them, now they're church leaders back in Albania. But that's the thing. This is why Christianity trumps over all this. This is how you find victory.
But Al, my point is, there's a lot of group of people, religious people, who are going around trying to see the signs of the end of the times. And, of course, a lot of these things that were written in the Bible were talking about what was going to happen in Jerusalem in AD 70. But, and they make applications to the final coming of Jesus. But I'm sitting here thinking, well, I got to be involved in something right now because, we believe the kingdom is here through Jesus, the Lord poured out the Spirit in Acts 2, made it available. Jesus said, go preach the gospel to all nations. And whoever believes is baptized will be saved, Mark 16. So that's what Peter did. That's what we're doing now. But I saw that happen. Of course, back then I was young and immature. It's like, yeah, I'll go to Russia. I'll do this. And then as the years have gone by, I'm like, because ever since 2014 happened, I've been keeping up with it.
Yeah.
So I wasn't shocked that this happened because they've been fighting for 8 years over there, right in that little community. It just didn't get a lot of press because... And
really, you can go back further than 8 because that's been the birthplace of every world war has been within that region.
I mean, we're talking about kids dying and you say that, and civilians dying.
Oh, it's just heartbreaking.
It's just, and when you were in the very town where this is going on, it does something to you,
Sure it does.
So, well, just this past year, when I got the opportunity to share Jesus in Iran via Greece, I felt the same thing. I was like, well, this opportunity came up, which Missy was surprised because, she called me and she's like, hey, they want us to go to Greece. They got a group of Persians that you can share Jesus with, and they'll funnel it to Iran. I said, I'm in. But she was shocked because I didn't even say, when is it, where? I was like, let's go. Because I took the same thinking. I thought, okay, we got something going on here, and there's an opportunity. Because I kept thinking about the Ukraine. I was like, there's no doubt in my mind that God inserted his people. It just like it goes back to Corinth. When he said that, and Paul was frustrated and being persecuted, I think it's in Acts, is it 18? And the angel appeared to Paul in the dream and said, I have people here in the town. Keep sharing.
Yeah.
So I think when you see those opportunities, number one, we should move on them. I mean, number two, was it rough? Yes. I mean, it kind of ruined me for going on mission trips because it was just so difficult.
It's hard.
It never got above freezing. We didn't have enough food and all that. And it was dangerous. There were people in the town who did not approve what we were doing. And now that I look back on it, I think they wouldn't have had a problem putting a bullet in my head with all what's going on now.
But you were there. Same way people have asked me for, why do you want to go in this country? It's so dangerous. And I'm like, look, I'm there as God's guy. I mean, I fully, if my life is taken there, I'm a martyr for the kingdom. And if he spares me and I come back home, then I just did his work. So I never viewed it like that. I mean, even though they're not easy, and the older you get, the harder it is to be able to make the trek. But I have the exact same mentality.
But I mean, that's why when we get to 1 Corinthians 15, I mean, this is what we're doing this for. I mean, you're right. The resurrection is the true power. I mean, it's way bigger than what they're trying to do by taking over countries, and we're going to threaten you, and we're going to be resurrected.
So let's take one more break. So one of my all-time favorite sponsors of the podcast is a group called Samaritan's Purse, which is Franklin Graham's group. And the one thing I can say about these guys, and we've experienced this personally, because when we had a couple of bad storms here.
Oh, they were here rolling out the red carpet, and I mean, they are awesome.
There is one of the things about this always said about Samaritan's Purse, when something's going on, people know they're going to be there. And I've told Franklin this personally myself. I said, that's a comfort and a peace to people, to know you're going to show up. So there, as we know, and we've been talking about on the podcast, there have been more than 2 million refugees that have fled Ukraine. And so Samaritan's Purse, once again, is there. They're right there in Poland, some of these neighboring countries. They're airlift and relief supplies. They got a field hospital. They've got all these different places, Poland, Romania, Moldova. So they've asked for a couple of things. One is, of course, to join them in praying for those that have been affected. I mean, especially those that have been displaced. And also, if you want to support Samaritan's Purse and the people of Ukraine, here's what you can do. Go to SamaritansPurse.org/unashamed. You can donate there or you can learn more. SamaritansPurse.org/unashamed, or click the link in the show's notes that'll be here for you to look at. 800-789-1776 is the number you can call. 800-789-1776. Check these guys out and help out today. So
everything, by the way, everything collapses when it comes to the gospel if you take the resurrection out of it. It all collapses. It collapses.
Right.
That has to be in there.
Well, you remember, every time I think about we have this discussion, I think about in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, whenever Jesus was being tempted by the evil one. And you remember one of the temptations, he takes him up on this high mountain, and he looks at her and he says, look at all the splendor of the kingdoms of the world.
Yep.
And he boldly tells the Son of God, they all belong to me.
Yep.
And every time I think about that.
That's the one who's whispering in Vladimir Putin's ear.
Exactly. Or Joe Biden or anybody else.
Joe Biden.
See, that's the thing
else.
about it. We look at it as like we're the moral equivalent, but you look at our own leadership in our own country. How can we be moral with a guy like Putin when some of the things we're putting forth? So when I see the evil one at work, think about it, the triggers that he's working, because Putin, here we don't know what all he's motivating, why he's doing it. But we got our regime that says the most important thing is climate change, and so we want to do away with all fossil fuels. Well, how does a guy like that hear that? His whole economy is set up on fossil fuels. So he's like, it's me against the world. So here he goes as a mad dictator. But the evil one is pulling the levers.
That's right.
To the whole system.
That's
but Al,
correct.
it's pretty clear why he's doing it. I mean, he's bitter that they all broke up.
Right. Because he's an old KGB guy.
Ukraine's wanting to be involved in NATO and the European Union, and they're like, that's why these are extremists. We don't want you being led by that. The president is of Jewish origin, where they're like, no. It always comes back to the same stuff. Prejudice.
Yep.
Freedom. You don't want them to be free. You want them under your rule. There's power in numbers. You want to be able to have the biggest stick. You want to be able to yield your power, and have a. I mean, it goes back to the beginning of time. That's why what Jesus did, God inserting Himself not only into time, but in a woman who was a virgin, just to get here is so incredible. But for him to live a perfect life and to die for all of this immorality, including the very acts that we're talking about, I mean, offering his grace even to that part of our society, which is incredible, and then coming back, showing us a power that we hadn't even contemplated.
Right.
I mean, as humanity. That's why we left off in that.
You remember Jesus' answer, by the way, Jace, worship the Lord your God and serve Him only. So you don't want to put anything above Him when it comes to governments on the planet.
Exactly. And so that's why in 1 Corinthians 15, when he which we went through this extensively last podcast about the gospel saves you. Otherwise,
we went through the first 11.
Yeah, we skipped over that part, and that's what I was going to bring up today. In verse 4, where it says that He was buried and that He was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and then it says, this is the part we left out, 5 to 7, that He appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, in which that's when we're assuming he was struck down
on the road to Damascus.
On the road, which is crazy. So you say, well, why is that important? Because this whole thing is based on faith, which was God's idea. You know, if you're going around looking for proof that there is a God, I mean, outside of the evidence of creation and the Bible, but God chose this to be through faith. Faith being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we don't see, you know, Hebrews 11:1. But when you really think about the ramifications of what I just read, this is one of the strongest proofs of the resurrection, that the tomb is empty, that you would never find Jesus' body because it's not there. He came back. Because here all these people, what separates what the world tends to view our beliefs as just some radical, crazy view that's based on myths and legends and there's no evidence, even though we have this document over, 1,000 years, 41 authors, is you have guys who gave their life, because you go to the history book, all these guys that I just read about, except a couple, were martyred because they wouldn't deny that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead.
Yep.
All they had to do, they get them up there, because now you fast forward, all these men, all these martyrs, because you brought up the idea about martyr.
Yeah.
So they say, you're telling me that they died because they wouldn't deny that Jesus Christ was who he said he was? Well, just think about this. This is different from every other philosophy that you think of when you think about people giving their lives up. Even the terroristic society. They give their lives because they think what they are believing in is true. In this case, since they died and not denying that Jesus was Lord and resurrected, who would do that knowing this was all just a made-up story? No one. Certainly not all of them. You just think about it. At what point do you say, you know what, he was a good man, but I'm not saying he was resurrected. So that appearing, when it says then that he appeared, and we've read the text before many times in previous podcasts, but he was going around as a dead man back from the dead, saying, look at my hands and look at my feet. Touch me and see. He spent 40 days there, according to Acts 1, giving many convincing proofs that he was alive, which is Acts 1. I think it's a very powerful, confidence-giving few verses.
Yeah, and I think it also shows you the power of, in this case, it's full spiritual freedom, that we've been set free from the law of sin and death. And so they're like, which we'll talk about later with the resurrection, how powerful it is. Let's take another break. But, Jason, when you look at it, that's exactly the Ukrainians that are staying to fight. I mean, they know the odds are stacked against them. Why are they staying and fighting? You know, because I don't know what Putin expected, but he didn't expect them to still be fighting 2 weeks later. But they're fighting for the idea of freedom. It's the idea. They were under the Iron Curtain. Now they're not. And so they're like, we're not going back. We'll give our lives before we do that. Well, I think that's the same concept. Of the same martyrdom that you see.
Well, that's why I was moved the first time I was reading Ephesians 6 when it says, you know, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, and it's against the spiritual forces of evil. Yeah, we're looking at good and evil. And then he was like, so you can take your stand so you can stand. I'm like, why am I surprised they're standing?
Right.
I mean, I know there was a spark there, and I don't know if that took off or just, I mean, maybe there's things that we, don't know what's going on, but I'm moved and I'm impressed with the courage. Yeah. Because they're basically saying, and it's, the chance of victory for Ukraine is so small because they're just pinned down, outnumbered, and have no air support. But I'll tell you one thing, they're making a name for themselves.
They're making a stand.
Because it certainly hasn't been easy, and they're giving their lives. I mean, it's impressive. I wanted to read this, though, Al.
But if you were and are a child of the resurrection, it would make you view death in a whole different light.
Well, exactly.
It makes you invincible.
I was going to read this, in John 7:5, it's an obscure verse, but it says, for even Jesus' own brothers didn't believe in him. And then when you get to Acts 1, now we're talking post-resurrection now. The verse I mentioned a while ago, verse 3, Jesus, he stayed here 40 days. After his suffering, he showed himself and gave many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared over 40 days. Well, you fast forward, and when you get up into verse 13, so here's the believers upstairs in a room, and here's all the people that were there. Well, a lot of these similar people that we just read in 1 Corinthians 15 that he appeared to, they're here. And in verse 14, it says, they all joined together constantly in prayer with the women, and it was, I think the Chosen's done a good job of that, showing this ragtag group that was following men and women, and the mother, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's happened here? Why are we all up in a room praying? And at one time, they didn't believe, because I do think it would be hard for them if it was your brother. I mean, that'd be like, you saying, hey, Jase, guess what? I'm the son of God.
I've come here.
Okay.
Come here to save all of mankind.
I just think that's normal. I'm not giving them a pass. But you said, what changed that? I know what changed it. If you go die, because you would know, I would know if my brother died.
Yep.
Word would get to me. I would go to the funeral.
Yep.
I'd say, you know what? It's over. And then 3 days later, you're back. Guess what? I'm in a room in your honor.
I'm all in.
To whoever you said you came from, I'm in.
Yep.
So I just think it's when you start putting these little pieces of the puzzle together, which is that's not our motivating factor. God chose to do this through faith for us. But it just seems, when you start thinking about, well, did Jesus really come back from the dead? You're putting these historical facts in order that you wouldn't even need the Bible to put the clues together. But these are just facts of life. These people were here. They have these claims, and they all died. It's documented because they wouldn't deny that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead.
Right.
You tell me. Well, why did they do it?
Why die for a lie?
I think they saw a dead man come back to life.
Well, and you're right.
So they said, oh, we're going to kill you. Well, if you had seen a dead man come back to life, and now you're being threatened, like we're seeing in our powers today, it's the same threat. Yep. I'll kill you. And you're like, go ahead.
Make my day.
I'm coming back, you idiot. You'd leave out the idiot part.
But you're right, because you remember that there's a text, I think it was when we were John or Matthew, where Jesus was contemplating going up to the Feast of Tabernacle, and the brother said, well, if you're going to be a public figure, you got to get out there. You got to mingle. I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, they were like being his PR director. So what that meant was they really didn't believe he was the Son of God, but they knew he had a following. I mean, they're watching what's going. So you're right. They looked at everything through a kind of a carnal lens, I guess.
That's why it's just, look, we've turned this on its head. That's why I got over my shyness. That's why I got over my, I don't want to say something and embarrass myself. That's why I got over my fear of going into dangerous countries and sharing Jesus, because it comes down to the resurrection. That you think people that are dangerous who are not scared to die is one thing. People who know they're coming back from the dead, they're way more dangerous and bold and aggressive. And that's the team I'm with. I mean, of course, we're fortunately doing it all in love, where the people who are trying to use death as a power, they're doing it mainly on hate.
Right.
It's just incredible how it works.
Yep.
Well, and it still holds on that the power of that idea of the fear of death. I mean, we just went through it with COVID, right? We saw it for 2 years. I mean, people just would give away all your freedoms because you think somehow maybe it'll keep you alive longer than your neighbor.
But don't you think it's ironic that hate goes with death and lying, and then life goes with love?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, He just spent a whole chapter in 1 Corinthians on 13 on love. And now we spent a whole chapter on coming back from the dead.
Well, and think about it. Why would he have these two focuses, especially to a church that's struggling as much as this church is? Because they had lost focus on what was important.
And they were divided. He spent several chapters on unity.
Yep.
And realizing, you know what? You have differences. You have different talents. You have different backgrounds. You all have committed different sins. You have different ways that you came to Christ. Different people were used, but now you're following them. You have different views on whether you can eat meat. And I mean, all of these differences. And then 1 Corinthians 12 is beautiful because he's like, we're all given the same spirit to drink. We're uniting in Jesus.
I think that's why my experience in Eastern Europe, Jase, was so powerful, because when you're watching the church, sort of the genesis in an area of the church, it's so much like the Acts model. Then even a few years go by and you get into the Corinthians and you see what begins to happen with the people of God. But what I witnessed there in the 3 weeks I was there, you talk about unity and excited about being together. Nobody was fighting over this, that, and the other. And look, these people that were coming in, they had different ways of viewing the scripture. But this group was just, they were brand new, and they were like, we want to tell as many people as possible. And so as close as we can stay to that mentality before we get into the other and the divisive part, the better.
Well, I'm sure there'll be people hear this and think, you think something that happened 30 years ago, is made a difference? Yes, I believe God is alive and well, and he works through his people.
Yep.
And he gave a lot of those people the message of Jesus before what was all fixed to happen. It's like I heard the preacher give an illustration yesterday when he said,
they're fighting.
Look, the preacher gave the illustration. He said, when you go out in the field and you see a turtle on a fence post, it didn't get there by itself.
That's right.
It was a good point. I'm like, you think this just happened, and then all of a sudden that happened? What was you going to say, Phil?
I was just fixing to say, I don't know what I was fixing to say.
I got you. I got you distracted on the turtle on the fence post.
Once he saw the turtle on the fence post.
Yeah, the turtle on the fence post stole whatever I was fixing to say. I think it was something to do with people that are there, that are giving their life. A lot of them may, in fact, going back to y'all's visit, look at the resurrection and say, what can they do to me?
And there's been...
I'm here to...
And there's been waves of people that have done it for the last 30 years, because there's a lot of other people that I've heard about recently. I just wanted to say to folks, who you may have heard this today and been motivated, if you go to onekingdom.org, we have a way you can give. And the same guy Jase is talking about is our guy.
Hey, I put my money where my mouth is, and I was hoping we would do this.
Yeah.
If you want to, at least, I trust these guys, and so I give them my money on various projects, and I've been around the world with them. And they're trying to get Jesus out to the world, and they're just trying to help people. A lot of what they do just helps people.
So the very guy Jase was talking about is still engaged and is going to be our main guy to be able to get this aid into where it needs to get. So if you want to help, that's a good way to do it.
Look, our hearts goes out to all the people of Ukraine. We love them all and hate that they're going through this. But I'm getting my money to the people who love the Lord over there, and because they have a special place in my heart. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, well, we'll in our overtime, we'll set up what we're going to be going into for the rest of 1 Corinthians 15 on the resurrection.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.